You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. That's me, your host. Today, what I want to do is explore the interesting intersection between the human psyche and the complex interplay between psychological vulnerability and moral development. Okay? So before I sort of deep dive in, the reason why I want to do this is because we've been doing stuff on patriarchal versus non-patriarchal relationships, and to explore the difference and why we should be heading towards non-patriarchal relationships rather than staying stuck in ancient history. So the question that was put to me recently was, are patriarchal relationships dead? Now, as much as I'd like to say yes, the unfortunate reality is that they might be in decline, but they're certainly not dead. In Australia, a 2017 National Community Attitude Survey revealed that a substantial minority of people, especially men, believe men should dominate relationships and families. 1 in 4 Australians believe women prefer a man to be in charge of the relationship. And about 1 in 6 agree that men should take control in relationships and be the head of the household. Okay. So obviously not dead. Dying maybe, but not dead. So the reason I want to bring this to a head, in essence, is because I'm going to argue that women in patriarchal relationships are essentially vulnerable. During these vulnerable times, women can struggle with stress management, emotional regulation, and fundamentally maintaining healthy relationships. So how does this vulnerability affect our moral compass, or women's moral compass, or the ability to discern right from wrong? Okay, I'm not going to talk about men because I want to focus on that part of the relationship that's most vulnerable in the patriarchal relationship. So in order to really get an answer to that question, we need to discuss the idea of moral development. Now, I've done that in previous podcasts, but I'm going to run over this again because I think it's really, really important to understand. The renowned psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg proposed a theory of moral development with 6 stages. The first 2, grouped under the pre-conventional morality, occur in early childhood, where moral decisions are based primarily on anticipation of punishment or on the promise of reward. The next 2 stages are categorized as the conventional morality, typically emerge during the late childhood and adolescent phase. Here, social norms and laws are respected and followed, and moral decisions are often influenced by the desire to maintain social order or gain social approval, right? Now, the final 2 stages, post-conventional morality, occur in adulthood. Here, individuals understand that while rules and laws exist for the benefit of the majority, there are times when those laws might need to be challenged for the greater good. In the ultimate stage, individuals develop a personal set of ethics and principles that guide their actions, regardless of social norms. So when an individual is psychologically vulnerable, navigating these stages can become increasingly challenging. Fear fears can come in, feelings of overwhelm and a lack of emotional clarity can cloud moral judgment, leading often to decisions that might not align with the person's usual ethical standards. Now, this can manifest in various ways, including engaging in corrupt behaviour, unethical practices. So, when a psychologically vulnerable individual turns to corruption, it could fundamentally be because they cannot fully comprehend the consequences, or because their environment has conditioned them to believe that the gains outweigh the moral cost. Now, in a patriarchal relationship, this is where women can become fundamentally vulnerable to not just corruption, but including breaking the law. So when we then sort of delve into the world of psychological vulnerability, it's not hard to imagine how this might affect an individual's journey through the stages of moral development. To understand this better, let's take into account an example. Imagine a woman, let's call her Emily. Emily is deeply in love with her partner and is fully committed to her relationship. However, she's going through a particularly tough time. She's lost a job and is grappling with self-esteem issues. Emily's emotional and psychological vulnerability is at a high during these circumstances, or due to these circumstances. So let's begin to bring in Kohlberg's stages of moral development. Emily has always firmly believed in the sanctity of relationships and the importance of honesty and trust, which falls under the post-conventional morality stage. But her current emotional state might blur these principles. Now imagine a situation where a charming and attractive colleague shows interest in Emily. This colleague is flattering, he's supportive, he provides Emily with the emotional support that she's been missing due to her present turmoil. Now, the colleague suggests an affair, assuring Emily that it will remain a complete secret. Now, under normal circumstances, Emily would outright reject this proposition. However, her heightened state of vulnerability due to her recent job loss and her self-esteem issues, coupled with the temptation of immediate emotional support and validation, clouds her moral judgment. Instead of clearly seeing the violation of her own values and principles and the potential damage to her relationship, Emily might just consider the proposition due to the short-term relief it provides. This decision doesn't align with her typical moral standards, but the clouded judgment resulting from a psychological vulnerability ultimately makes it possible for her to take that step. So let's consider another person. Let's call her Lisa. Lisa is a single mother working in a low-paying job, struggling to provide for her family. An opportunity arises for her to engage in fraudulent activity at work that promises a substantial monetary gain, enough to solve her financial problems. Now, although she's always upheld principles of honesty and integrity, principles that would ideally fall under post-conventional morality, according to Kohlberg, her current psychological state, due to financial stress, might push her to consider this unethical path. The stress of her circumstances might make the immediate relief of financial gain seem more significant than the ethical cost, leading to a decision that deviates from her usual moral standards. So these examples highlight how psychological vulnerability can lead to clouded moral judgment, and to make it challenging for individuals to navigate their moral development stages effectively. if often resulting in decisions that might not align with their typical ethical principles. Now, the problem with this is what? Well, for a start, it's going to exacerbate the person's psychological distress. And they might experience cognitive dissonance, that discomfort resulting from conflict between their actions and their beliefs. And over time, they might be able to rationalize their actions, but it's not necessarily a resolution. Okay, so rationalizing their actions is fundamentally a coping mechanism that can erode their moral compass even further. So once you're in, and the rest of it is a slippery slope. Now, it wouldn't possibly surprise too many people that you don't necessarily need to be under financial duress or somehow overly lacking in self-esteem or so on to be vulnerable to that sort of moral corruption, for a better word, because it is a moral corruption. I've talked about moral injuries before. When our morality is compromised, especially through, control mechanisms that either emerge through society or, that come about in relationships. So coercive control in a relationship is a classic example of where we can be put under such pressure that we're going to abandon our principles, our values, and we're going to, submit to that person who's more powerful. And as I said, in a patriarchal relationship, it is men who tend to be the more powerful in the relationship. And will have a lot more to gain than the female, the woman. So the question then arises is, how do we fundamentally address such a complex issue? Now, there's no easy answer to this. We might talk about promoting good mental health, fundamentally fostering environments that encourage ethical behaviour, ensuring proper moral education from a very early age. It might also include teaching and reinforcing Kohlberg's stages of moral development, fostering empathy and respect for social norms, and highlighting the importance of individual ethical principles. That's all very well, but the reality is that and it's not always society to blame, but society puts an enormous amount of pressure on an individual, no matter what stages of moral development they're in. I mean, I could talk about teenagers, wanting to fit in and being put under, coercive pressure to conform and will do things that under normal circumstances they wouldn't do. Similarly, men, if they're in a hierarchical relationship, wherein there are more powerful men, there are more men with more resources that give them more power, a lot of men will succumb and submit to that sort of moral coercive control and relinquish their own ethical standards. So let's not be too judgmental about people in this, because the reality is, we can all have some pressure point, some Achilles heel that will compromise how we see ourselves and what we think we would do under certain circumstances. But one thing I can tell you is that when we are aware of this, it's harder for us, to basically let go of our values, principles, ethics, and morality. It was very interesting because recently there was a case in Australia, in New South Wales, where a premier was found to be corrupt in her conduct. She withheld a relationship that proved to be a conflict of interest from public knowledge. It gets a lot more complicated, but in the short version, a friend of mine and I had quite a debate about whether she should be classed as corrupt or not. And my argument was, despite her vulnerabilities, because it was shown in the hearing that her partner exerted coercive control over her in a very patriarchal way, she still had the opportunity to disclose that relationship and to stick to her or a moral compass, because she's made other decisions that brought the moral compass into question. Now, I'm not here to diagnose. I'm only here commenting on what was presented in the media. So in my book, despite her psychological, emotional vulnerabilities to a coercive male, she should have acted against the pressure. She should have acted according to the policies and the principles of the legal system and the public service system that she was in. So, it's an interesting thing about, it doesn't matter where in the social hierarchy we are, there's always an opportunity to either fall or to actually step up. So let me wrap this up. To conclude, the intertwining psychological vulnerability and moral development is, as I said, complex and it's nuanced. But by getting some awareness around this and by understanding and addressing it, we can make strides in combating issues like corruption and promoting healthier minds and societies. So, folks, think about it. Think about this in your own life, in your own circumstances. When have you done things? And we've all done it to some degree, where we've let go of our own ethics and did something that later on we regret it and possibly still do. Sometimes these things are just unfinished business that haunt us and that put us in even more vulnerable positions. So, thank you for joining me. And as always, every little small change contributes to a bigger difference. So let's keep the dialogue open and continue to inspire change within and around us. And if you want to follow my work more, please don't hesitate to go to www.goodmengreat.com or www.gunterswoboda.com. Tune into my podcast, push that little button that, makes it something that you get delivered every week, because that's what we do. We come out once a week. So, until next time, which is next week, let me bid you goodbye.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda at noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.